Hello and welcome to Hey Not the Face with your host John Nash and your producer me, Steffi Haynes. And this is a bonus update, but the bonus is actually going to be free for you guys. We recorded an episode this past Thursday that was going to take you from the beginning of the antitrust lawsuit all the way up to the current time. But since we recorded, more news broke, and we figured that we would let you guys know right off the bat what that news is. So John, who is actually driving because he is on vacation at his family's place, he's driving right now just so he could do this. So pardon the external noises. John, how you doing? And tell us the news.
Well, I'm doing good. Traffic's moving nice, so it's not too bad. It's dark here in Minnesota, so it's a little chilly. But the news of the episode is outdated already. But we do have a lot of good information in that episode about the case, the history, what could happen. So it's still worth listening. But what happened is, on Friday, the day after we recorded, they had a hearing, and the judge basically threw out the defendant, Zuffa, the UFC's motion to reopen discovery. So that got thrown out. And then he strongly hinted that he's going to not agree with the defendants about the motion for summary judgment, that we're going to have trial April 8th. And then today, Monday, even bigger, out of left field, no one expected this. He said that if the plaintiffs in the Lee case win the trial, that they will consider injunctive release for that case using only the discovery for the Lee case. So what that means is, instead of the plaintiffs and the defendants having to wait to the end of the next antitrust trial, the Johnson case, to consider injunctive release, which is the idea that the judge, not the jury, the judge could order changes to the UFC's behavior, it'll be decided immediately after the Lee case if the plaintiffs win. Suddenly that case is a lot more at stake and a lot riskier for the UFC.
Are we thinking that now the UFC might come to the table and start talking settling?
You would think they would. I mean, unless they really are confident they can win an appeal, but they didn't win the appeal on the class search, they are playing with fire, because I know a lot of people, like my co-host on Show Money, they think the damages are the big holdup. I think injunctive relief is a big part, because damages suck if they have to pay the damages, but injunctive relief really changes the way they have to do business, and that could add even more cost to the UFC, but they can just take loans out, right, to cover the cost, and the loans would pay for the damages, and then they'd have to pay the loans off, which would be much cheaper per year. But with injunctive relief, it's like all your big name fighters might suddenly be leaving the promotion, and then you're not as valuable as promotion. Where before they might have been kicking the can down the road as much as possible, now the settlements really got to be on the table for them. They really got to be considering that. But who knows? Maybe they have no interest in settling. So far, it doesn't seem like they had, but you'd think so.
All signs seem to be pointing towards this thing not going their way. Is there any reason why that they would actually let this go to court and risk all of that?
There are theories we could have. I don't know for sure why they would. I mean, if it was just damages, I could kind of see, because, again, they could take out a loan to cover the cost of damages, but keep doing their business because their business potentially is so profitable, and then appeal it. So it's huge amounts of damages. The risk isn't that great. But what do you do when the damages are really high and then the court orders you to change your business where you no longer can make the money to cover the damages? That's a massive risk. So, and the other thing too is the judge, Boulware, he is going so fast and so much in favor of the plaintiffs the last couple decisions. You almost have to wonder if he's trying to send a message to the defendants. You better settle. I do not want to see this in trial. If they don't settle, I don't think they're going to get motion to summary judgment, which we get early next year probably. If they don't settle, we're going to have trial April 8th, and it's going to be a lot at risk for the UFC.
My goodness. Okay, if I have $10 in my hands right now and somebody told me I must bet that $10, should I bet that they're going to settle?
Yes. Are the plaintiffs going to get a trial if the UFC doesn't settle? I'd say bet that for sure. We're going to get to trial. But are they going to settle? I would favor that, but who knows? The UFC has shown no intent to settle so far. I would say bet that they settle.
In my opinion, they have a really good poker face right now.
The person holds all the cards that are shown right now seem to be the plaintiffs. So really a lot to count on the jury, because jury trials often go against companies in these things, and also a lot to count on the appeal process. So
spicy goings on. All right. Is there anything else that we should know, or is this the bulk of the breaking news update?
The big news today was that they're going to move the Levy Zuffa injunctive relief up. We still got discovery evidence being released coming up. So who knows? By the time this airs, there might be 3 or 4 more things.
Other big news broke today in that we learned that the PFL finalized their deal and acquired Bellator. And the reason I'm mentioning that in this episode that's literally only about the antitrust suit is, could we see any of this as something that the defendants bring up in court?
Well, they won't be able to, because it's limited to the damages. The evidence is limited to the period. So 2017, they didn't reopen discovery. So all the new happenings with Bellator and the PFL can't be introduced into trial because that evidence has already been done. So this won't help them in this case. It might help in Johnson. UFC kept citing Bellator as a major rival, and yet Bellator basically just went out of business. So that might not help them on that end too. But the one thing too is, PFL, they are desperate for stars, and they can't get fighters because they're all signed to the UFC to these long-term agreements, and they're willing to throw tons of money around. If injunctive relief is offered and damages in this case, that might be the opening they need to finally get fighters.
It's good news for the plaintiffs, for sure. This is big news for the plaintiffs.
Oh, they got to be ecstatic. They got to be, absolutely floored. Yeah, the judge better not do anything else while I'm away on vacation.
But you know what, folks? If he does, you can count on John to drive up the street in the cold at night to deliver some news to you.
You cannot count on me to do that.
We can totally count on him. We're going to hold his feet to the fire. Anyways, on that note, we are going to wrap up this bonus update and take you into the rest of the show. Don't worry, you will get half of that for free as well. Anyways, stick around. We'll be right back. Today, we are going to encapsulate the UFC antitrust lawsuit into an easily digestible audible. So, John, how the hell are you?
Good. I got a message from a listener. Chris had a recommendation of how I should be using my mic, my M7 Shure mic. So hopefully it sounds better. If it does, thank him. If it doesn't, it's all his fault.
So let's talk about the antitrust suit, because there's been so many things happening in such a short window. And I guess the first question that I would ask is, why all of a sudden does it seem like it's snowballing towards the end?
Well, the reason it's snowballing towards the end right now, the why it's taking off, is because we finally got class certification. The class was certified. The judge granted that in August. So that was the big hurdle, because after that, everything kind of falls into place, what happens next. But we've been waiting years for that event to happen, even though back in 2020 he indicated it was going to happen. We finally got the written order, the official order that class was certified in August. And because that happened, then all the other steps that were waiting to happen could take place, and now they're happening rapidly. And on top of that, the judge seems very intent on keeping the case moving and getting us to trial.
That's fantastic, right?
That's good if you're a fighter. Good. If you're the defendants, UFC, it's not good, because you would like to delay this case as long as possible.
And is that what they're doing with the motion to reopen discovery?
Yeah, that is exactly what they're doing. Their goal is to kick the can down the road as long as possible, because even the plaintiffs brought this up in a recent filing. the damages, there's no interest on the damages, right? So the longer you wait, the damages don't grow. They actually shrink because of inflation. So the longer the UFC can wait, the less those damages are in real current dollars for them, because they're, the amount is frozen what was owed back at the time the damages took place. And and on top of that, the longer they can wait, if they lose the trial or if they have to settle eventually, the more money, because UFC's finances keep growing, and so it'll take a smaller hit to the company in the future as well. So for all those reasons, they would like to extend this case as long as possible.
So what we're going to do today is we're going to make the antitrust suit from top to bottom a really digestible piece. We're going to make it brief. So why don't you start at the top and explain how this all got started?
Well, it all started, not to talk about why the case started, but it all started on December 16, 2010, or 2014, sorry, December 16, 2014. The plaintiffs, the attorneys, Berger Montague and Rob Macy. Rob Macy was the attorney from the MMAFA, the Mixed Martial Arts Fighters Association, that kind of launched this whole thing. They filed a lawsuit, several lawsuits in a San Jose court. And those lawsuits all accuse the same thing: antitrust violations of what's called the Sherman Act, an old bill that's supposed to prevent monopolization in the industries, right? They claim the UFC violated that. And then eventually what happened is those complaints got merged into one complaint with the 5 named plaintiffs of Kung Lee. That's why it's Lee versus Zuffa is the name of the case, because Kung Lee was the first plaintiff. So it's Lee versus Zuffa is the name of the case. Zuffa is the parent company of the UFC, so people aren't aware of that. That's why it's always called Zuffa. And then the other named plaintiffs are John Fitch, Kyle Kingsbury, Javier Vasquez, and Brandon Vera. That's for the bout class. There was another class at the time called the identity class. The bout class they were accusing the UFC of monopolizing the industry and lowering wages on fighter pay for bouts, bouts that took place. Then there was another class for identity, that the UFC was using fighters' identity improperly and not paying fighters the right compensation. In other words, using on posters and games and stuff like that. And Nate Quarry was the member of that class. Now, going forward, we're going to lose the identity class, but that's how the case started. Then there was a whole process over a couple of years. We had various motions, a motion of summary judgment that was tabled by the judge. We had the venue moved from San Jose down to Las Vegas. We had discovery, and through discovery, we learned that the UFC's fighter share, the real number that's where we get that 15 to 20% now.
May I
because
ask
that came
question?
Out. Yeah, what's that?
Okay, I just want to interject whenever I hear something that I might think somebody else would want to know. You mentioned that it has been moved to Las Vegas since. Is that more beneficial to the UFC or to the plaintiffs?
Well, it was thought at the time it'd be more beneficial to the UFC, because one is the courts in Vegas are generally more conservative, and the San Jose courts were known as very friendly, especially on antitrust suits for plaintiffs. Now, it hasn't. The judge that's gotten assigned doesn't seem like it's helped them that much. There's also the argument that they might find a friendlier jury in Las Vegas compared to San Jose, but that's still questionable. I don't know. There's a lot of that's up in the air. People, generally normal people, do not like companies on these. That's why they always settle in the end. But that's why they moved, and that's where we're at.
So when we talk about what's happened since then, why did it take this incredible length of time? I mean, they filed in 2014. The pandemic didn't start until 2020. So what took 6 years just to get to the pandemic? Why has this taken so long?
Well, on top of all the steps we mentioned earlier, and discovery takes a long time to go through all the evidence, because there's literally like 1 million documents that the plaintiffs had to go through, right, to compile this. Then they have to hire experts to do regression models. So all that takes time and money. On top of all that, we get to a point where we had a hearing in 2019 to discuss the case, and then it looked like the judge was gonna grant class certification. Now I'm gonna define that really quick because people might not be aware of this. Before, it was a bunch of individual lawsuits accusing the UFC of an antitrust violation. But what they wanted was a class action lawsuit. And class action lets a small group of people represent a larger group in a lawsuit if they all have kind of the similar damages, the same reason, the same person caused the damages, the same reasons they were damaged, things like that. And so they were seeking, these named plaintiffs that I named, they were seeking to represent all the fighters during a class period that fought in the UFC, and then they would represent them going forward. And so damages, instead of just those guys winning damages, the entire group could win damages. On top of that, when you do a class action, you do not have to, the attorneys can actually recoup their payments from the class action, winnings, the damages. So fighters couldn't afford attorneys for these cases otherwise, right? Mm-hmm. So we were waiting for that class action. And so what happened is you had COVID comes, right? And that slows the court down because people can't go into, they can't show up to the court anymore. They have to do everything virtually through Zoom and stuff. But on top of it, probably more, there was another case that the UFC cited just as it looked like the judge was going to grant class action. The UFC cited a case that was going through the court system called the Oleana case, right? A tuna case is what we always call it because it was about a tuna company in grocery stores. And that case had an unusual ruling, a new ruling that would have set a new standard for how you grant class certification, right? How you judge what members are damaged and what percentage of the members have to be damaged to actually make a class. So that had to work all the way through the Ninth Circuit. And then eventually it was the Ninth Circuit overturned the rules. We went back to where we were at the very beginning. So it's almost like it never happened. But the judge had to wait till that ruling worked its way through the system because he would have granted a class ruling and then it could have immediately been overturned because he didn't take in consideration this new ruling by the court, right? And so we had to wait for that court to go, that other case, the Oleana case, tuna case, to work its way through the system. And then what the judge did, in some ways, it probably helped the plaintiffs because the judge cited repeatedly Ninth Circuit's ruling on the Oleana case and put it all through his decision. And so now his decision to grant class certification delayed for a couple of years because of that was probably made a stronger granting class certification because he included all this new standard that had been created by the Oleana case.
So now we have stuff that's actually up to date.
Yeah, now we're up to August when he grants class certification. The date we've been waiting for years. He grants class certification, and now we've just been rolling ahead since then.
All right, so we're at the point now where the UFC filed an appeal. Take us through that process and what the judge said to that appeal. Actually, what the judge said, what the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals said.
Yeah, well, so the UFC, because class certification is such a major hurdle, and because in these type of cases, the damages from class actions can be so large, and people got to remember too, an antitrust are even larger because you treble the damages, which we'll get to when we talk about what could happen eventually. You are automatically granted an appeal when class certification is granted. So the UFC filed their appeal immediately after the judge, actually 2 weeks after the judge granted class certification. And I should point out, he granted class certification only for the bout class. For the identity class, that did not get granted class certification. So right now, that case is not, that side of it's not progressing. But for the plaintiffs, it's not as big a deal because the identity was much, much smaller damages, where the bout class is massive damages. So the UFC Zuffa filed an appeal to the Ninth Circuit claiming the judge improperly granted class certification. Now, the general thought was, and I know a lot of people thought that the Ninth Circuit would overturn the judge's appeal or review the case because there's a whole process. They would grant the appeal and then we'd have a review of it next year, delaying the case longer. I'm gonna boast a little bit. I was one of the people that thought that the plaintiffs had a very good chance to get past appeal. They did. The Ninth Circuit, and this is another surprise. People thought we wouldn't get a decision from them, a ruling on this until December. relatively quick in early November, we got a ruling. The Ninth Circuit just posted a simple thing, basically 1 sentence about this, that they denied the motion they denied the request for appeal. And so as soon as the appeal was killed, that sets up only basically 2 hurdles before we have a trial. And those 2 hurdles potentially for the plaintiffs are Zuffa wants to reopen discovery for evidence, and then there's a motion. They were allowed to refile a motion for summary judgment.
What I want you to do is explain to our listeners what the summary judgment motion means. Break that down to its atoms.
Okay, well, the motion to summary judgment is it's a motion that you're allowed to file, and basically you're asking that the judge to throw the case out because no reasonable jury would ever agree with this case. Sometimes it's, in a lot of cases it happens because there's not a lot of evidence is presented, right? That they don't make a great case.
Okay.
Sorry, I got some construction going outside apparently. But the powers that be are trying to silence the show.
Okay.
So yeah.
And then to reiterate one last time,
yeah.
The motion to reopen discovery is definitely a stalling tactic, correct?
Well, yeah, that's a stalling tactic. To get back to the motion of summary judgment really quick, though, as I was paused for that construction, the thing is everybody's very sure, based on the judge's comments and his class certification ruling, that they are not going to get that motion to summary judgment. So that seems to be a non-starter. We're going to have a hearing November 17th. So we are recording this November 16th. November 17th, they're going to have a hearing about the motion to reopen discovery. That seems like an obvious attempt for the Zuffa, just a Hail Mary, basically, to extend the case longer, because what they're asking for is a 4 to 6 month delay to go over new evidence that appeared after the class period. And so that's what they're asking for. It seems very unlikely that the judge is going to grant that.
And we have received a response from the plaintiffs regarding that motion to reopen, correct?
Yes, the UFC Zuffa filed a motion to reopen discovery, and the plaintiffs filed their response. Both, when you read them on individually, they make strong cases, but I think the plaintiffs it's obvious that the plaintiffs make the argument that the UFC, they had years to do this and they didn't ask for it. And also that the class period, and I'll point out the class period covers from December 16, 2010. And the reason it starts December 16, 2010, you can only go back 4 years in an antitrust suit. So they filed December 16, 2014. It starts 4 years earlier, and it ends June 30, 2017. That's the class period. So the fighters that basically 1,200 fighters right now, they estimate fit in the definition, fighters that fought in the UFC in North America or broadcast in North America. And if they fought outside the UFC, outside the U.S., they had to be a U.S. citizen or a U.S. resident at the time, and that covers about 1,200 fighters. That's the class period. The plaintiffs, I think, argue pretty persuasively that the UFC had years to do this, they hadn't done it, and now suddenly, when trial's looming, they bring this up, and it's just an attempt to extend the case longer, because whatever changes happened during 2017 should not impact that class period.
Also, don't they note that it would extend way beyond the 4 to 6 months that they requested because of the sheer amount of discovery?
Correct? Oh, that's the other thing. Yeah, they're trying to open the door, but as soon as they get in there, then it'll be impossible to get it done in that time.
Right. So you can't close the door behind you.
Yeah, it's very unlikely. All right. I find it very unlikely the judge is going to grant that.
All right. I want to go back to the other lawsuit that you said is basically stagnating right now because, one, it's identity class and they denied that, and it basically sort of stalled that out. What is the second lawsuit for? Is it for the folks after the December 14, 2016, correct? That suit by Cajun Johnson and everybody, that would address the fighters that came after. Is that right?
That is 100% right. The current class period, it ends, it goes from December 16, 2010 to June 30th, 2017, right?
Okay.
So that's the period, the class period, every fighter that the Lee versus Zuffa case takes. So it ends June 30th, 2017. In 2021, the plaintiffs filed another lawsuit with the named plaintiffs Cajun Johnson and CB Dalloway on it. That covers from July 1st until today. It's ongoing. That case has not been granted class certification. It's just in the very beginning phases.
So that's a different case than the identity case.
Yes, the identity class was the same class period as the previous one, but it only covered the identity damages. The damages from, so there's two types of classes, two damages. There's the bout class and the identity class. The bout class are fighters that fought in the UFC and the money they would have made fight as a fighter. The identity class is basically all your auxiliary rights that the UFC has. So the identity class, the bout class, just to difference the damages. The bout class, their experts estimate that the fighters are owed from 2010 to 2017. Their damages are from $811 million to $1.6 billion. Just a massive sum of money, right? For the identity class, it was around $50 million in damages.
Okay, and with the new suit, have they set damages with the one that Cajun Johnson and CB Dalloway are named?
They have not set damage yet because they haven't even started discovery. You got to do discovery, and then you got to do regression models and all these models to show what the damages are. They haven't even started that yet. So we've not gotten anywhere. We should note too, with the Cajun Johnson suit, the Johnson v. Zuffa suit that starts up July 1st, there's some big differences. One is a new company now owns UFC compared to the Fertittas. Now it's Endeavor. Joe Silva's gone, so you have different executives in charge of the UFC. You also have changes to the UFC contract that were introduced in 2017. One of the changes, the sunset, is what let Francis Ngannou get out of his contract. So you have a different standard of contract for a while. And then more recently, they've introduced a class action waiver and arbitration clause into their contract. So you might have a large number of fighters that cannot take part in the class action lawsuit. So it's going to be very different, that Johnson case v. Zuffa. And so they'll have to go through discovery and they'll have to present new evidence and stuff like that. But that'll start after the Lee v. Zuffa case ends.
And it's the same group of attorneys handling it?
The same group of attorneys representing the plaintiffs.
All right. So let's move forward with what's happening with Lee versus Zuffa.
So what's happening now is we are waiting for the judge's decision on the motion to reopen discovery. After that, we're going to get a response from the plaintiffs later in the year about the motion for summary judgment. And then probably sometime early next year, we will get the judge's decision in the motion summary judgment. By all indications, he is going to deny it. And that means he's already set a date for the trial. So we should be looking at a trial, unless there's a settlement, April 8th, 2024. The defendants asked for him to move that date because they said their attorneys have another case at that time, and the judge denied it. He said, we are going to start on that date.
There is something that has happened, and that is plaintiffs in Lee versus Zuffa notify the court of their plan to start contacting and informing class members. Tell us what all that means and what it entails.
Well, before they're an official class, granted class certification, the plaintiffs weren't allowed to contact fighters, right? So they were denied that until they became the class representatives official. So when the judge granted class certification, now there's a process they have to go through, and they're going to ask the judge for permission now to start contacting fighters because they want to inform all the fighters about the suit and their rights. Because what's happening, there's another thing going on in the court, is another firm started basically poaching fighters, signing them up as getting them to opt out of the suit and sign with them. And I think it's 15 fighters, they said, that they got signed up with them already. So the plaintiffs that want to inform fighters, and fighters are listening, I'm going to summarize this here too, that you are automatically a member of the class, right? So they want you to pay attention. That way you can be on the list and get your damages and things like that and get updates of what's happening in the case. But you are automatically enrolled in the class unless you're Chael Sonnen and decided to opt out, which I think he did say at one point he opted out. We'll see if he sticks to that. But unless you choose to opt out of the case intentionally and write that you want to not be a member of the class, you are automatically rolled. So if they win any settlement or any damages in a trial, you automatically get damages. Now, there might be a benefit of opting out, but I should note one of the accusations put against the Sporico, I think they're called, Sporico firm, is that they were going to charge fighters up to 40% on top of what the other attorneys would have to make for for that fighter that they represented.
Spirico, would that be Sam Spiro?
No, no relation.
Okay, just curious.
No, completely different firm. So, no, I don't think they have anything to do with MMA. So, fighters should be allowed to get whatever representation they want, but they should be careful in cases like this. People will try to trick you into opting out and signing with them for the simple fact that they don't have to do any work, and then they can charge an extra 10, 20, 30% on top of your damages they want to take. Very much like a lot of MMA managers.
Yeah, I was just getting ready to say, that sounds like MMA management. So to put a pin in this episode, what should we look for next?
Well, next is probably we want to look for the what happens in the motion to reopen discovery. I'm sure it's going to be denied. We look for the motion of summary judgment. Then we wait and see if there's going to be a settlement. It does not look like the UFC is going to settle. And after that, we have April 8th, a trial starts. So it looks like, unless there's a settlement, it seems very, very, very likely we'll have a trial April 8th. Trial should take somewhere between 4 to 5 weeks. And then that's when it gets interesting, because during the trial, also during that time, at some point, we're going to start getting a lot of old evidence refiled, unredacted. So we've been going through some of the stuff that's been filed, getting fighter pay. There'll be more of that in the future. So we'll have more unredacted, unsealed documents. And then when we go to trial, we'll have the same. We'll have people brought in over to testify. So we should have a lot of new information if it does go to trial. And then the real interesting thing happens. What happens either at the end of trial or at a settlement? Right? Because either the UFC wins the case, and then that's one possibility. The UFC loses. If they settle, that's one form of damages. But if they lose the case, that $811 million to $1.6 billion in damages, it gets trebled. So that would be $2.4 billion to $4.8 billion in damages if the jury, it's going to be a jury trial, grants those damages. That's a lot of money for the UFC to pay. So that's a possibility. And then no matter what, if it goes to trial, you got an appeal process. The appeal process could end up dragging the case out longer, or a year after the trial, all the appeals may be burned out and we might be done. So things could still move very fast going forward. I know a lot of people think I know Paul Gift on Show Money thinks the damages is the big hang up for the UFC, why they wouldn't settle. I got a feeling that it's actually the injunctive relief the fighters want.
Before you move forward, tell everybody one more time, what is injunctive relief?
Well, on top of damages that the fighters are asking for, they're saying that Zuffa has taken over the industry, has a monopsony over the industry, has used a scheme to basically monopolize the industry, and we need to do something to unwind their control over the industry to make it fair, to make competition. And so what they need to do is injunctive relief. And injunctive release is you're asking the judge to order the Zuffa, the UFC, to do something to let fighters have a more open market. Now, they can only do positive injunctive relief. Negative injunctive relief, not positive. They can only tell them to stop doing something. They can't tell them they have to do something. So people saying like the judge is going to make them have the Ali Act or something, that judge couldn't do that.
All he can do is say, you have to stop doing this that you're already doing.
Yes, the judge will say and what the plaintiffs are asking for injunctive relief is they want the judge to limit contracts to 1 year max with no extensions for a period of time. And they think that would correct the industry. And that would be just a massive change to the UFC's business model. But that's what they want the judge to order. Now, I should note, injunctive relief isn't going to be part of this trial. The judge has already said he's going to look at injunctive relief as part of the Johnson case, right? So injunctive relief from the court end wouldn't come to the future. But if there's a settlement, the settlement might also cover the Johnson case. And if there's a settlement, if you listen to John Fitch and Kung Lee talk in interviews, they want injunctive relief as part of any settlement. They want some changes to the contracts for any settlement. So the UFC would have to, if they had to do a settlement, I mean, right now the UFC has, I think, like $700 million available to them that they can take out of optional loans they can take out. They're already pre-approved. So UFC wanted, they could take on $700 million in debt, pay that as a settlement, and then they would end up paying about 50, 60 million more dollars a year in interest going forward for a company that's making 400 million and plus in profit every year. That's not a death knell. So that's, the massive damages will not kill the company. They can always take out a loan and pay it. But if they're required, let's say, as part of that settlement, that money, the UFC, Kung Lee and those guys say, we want contracts no longer than 2 years. Well, 2 years is a very short contract. That means every few years, the big fight, Jones and Ngannou or McGregor, Diaz, or GSP versus whoever, Khabib, every few years, you'd be worried about those going, the fighters taking them somewhere else where they could make more money, or you'd have to pay those fighters to stay in the UFC, which means their wages would go up drastically. I don't know. That sounds like that might be a bigger risk to their model, to their finances than the damages.
Then why the hell are we not settling? I'm just flabbergasted by this. I mean, they really seem to be digging in too.
Well, like I just said, I think part of it is because the plaintiffs want they want injunctive relief as part of any settlement. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the big problem. I'm not 100% certain. I mean, the other thing is UFC, they really do not think the plaintiffs have a strong case, but it seems I would have to favor the plaintiffs going where they are now and what the case looks like. You have to favor they're going to win something.
And my last question here, and I know that a lot of things I'm having you reiterate because, we have new listeners all the time. But the other thing I want to ask you is Judge Boulware gave his personal opinion on this, and he did it in a series of notes. How much weight does that carry going into the actual trial in April?
Well, the only way it carries is it looks like the judge has made up his mind concerning certain aspects of the case. So it would suggest that ideas like the motion of summary judgment has no hope, right? Because the judge has made it clear that he believes the plaintiff's argument that the UFC has done these actions being a monopoly. And I should point out what they're arguing is the UFC has done basically three things that violate the Sherman Act. Now, they're claiming the UFC is a monopsony. For new listeners, a monopsony is the reverse of a monopoly, right? Monopoly is that there's only one seller of something. So you have to pay whatever price they want. Monopsony is that there's only one buyer. In this case, the UFC is the only buyer of elite talent MMA. Now that's not 100% true. People say, oh, there's Bellator one. When you're talking legally, we mean really monopsony power. We're not talking about that there's only one, literally, we're saying that there's one that has such a dominant control of the market, they basically dictate the price. So they're arguing the UFC has a monopoly, and the way they attained it is three things. One is they eliminated potential rivals like Pride and Strikeforce by buying them out, or other promotions by starving them out so they disappeared, by using restrictive contracts. So they have these contracts that everybody knows that basically go on and on and on with a bunch of extensions, and then using extra legal methods to get fighters to re-sign contracts by basically withholding fights from them or giving them bad fights, or just read our articles that Tim Bissell did covering Joe Silva's behavior during the UFC, and you'll see some of this. And what those did is they worked in tangent with the other two to make those contracts perpetual. So all those together represent that the UFC is violating the Sherman Act, which says that you can legally become a monopoly or monopsony, but you cannot intentionally become one. You cannot go out of your way to become one, and you cannot abuse your power when you're there. And that's what the plaintiffs are accusing. Is the UFC became a monopsony and then abused their power by paying much, much less than what an open market would have paid.
If you were to put on your Nostradamus hat and give your prediction for the April trial, what would your prediction be?
I mean, it's really hard. You never know for sure, but it could go either way. But you have to favor at this point that if it goes to trial, that the plaintiffs will win some damages. I know there's the famous, USFL case where they won the suit against the NFL and they only got $1. What people miss about that case is it wasn't that the jury decided with the USFL and then decided just to say, well, there was no real damages. We're only going to fine the UFC $1. It's that the plaintiffs, the jury did not know what they should assign for damages, and then they have interviews after the case. If they thought the judge would set the damages, so they only put $1 down to show that they thought they were damaged, but they thought the judge would correct it, and then they were horrified when the judge accepted those damages. So this case will not be the same because there's a regression model already laying out what the damages should be. So I doubt that'll happen. Also, you have to look at the fact that juries, regular people, it's not going to look good when you present. I don't care what the evidence says, any of the evidence, what the regression models and math says. When you have a group of executives on one side that made billions and all wearing nice suits and look good, and the other side is a bunch of fighters like holding an eye socket in because they're damaged and they can't hold a regular job because they've destroyed their bodies making very little money. That just is not a good look for a company. It's very risky. So
even in Vegas with a Vegas jury.
Even in Vegas, I mean, you got to remember, there's a lot of culinary union people in Vegas.
Yeah.
So there's even in Vegas where a lot of people might, and plus the Fertittas no longer own the UFC. So the connection to Vegas is not as strong as when the Fertittas had a mass number of employees with their station casinos. So,
but UFC is synonymous with Vegas, and everyone in Vegas knows the UFC, and the UFC sort of uses that prop up thing that they do as how much they're injecting into Las Vegas economy by holding most of their shows there.
They might, but I'm just regular people do not like the top guys, the bosses. That's the way it always seems to work that way. So I think it's risky by the UFC. This is not the state court where the judges are dependent on the Fertittas and UFC and stuff to stay on the bench. These are federal judges assigned by presidents. They cannot be removed. So there's no influence by the local businesses on them like they would with the state. That's why everybody was always terrified to go to trial in Nevada at the state level to sue the UFC because they had such influence on the court, they thought. But federal's different. So if I had to put my hat on, I'm going to say I think the UFC still, odds are at the last minute, if the trial looked like it's going bad, they will call and try to get some sort of settlement. But if it doesn't, I think it goes through. The plaintiffs win. I don't know if they win as much as they're asking for. The jury might whiff on paying the large amount of money that the UFC is asking. I mean, the plaintiffs are asking for. But if it goes to trial, I have to assume on odds, again, it's not 100%, but you have to weigh it, that the odds are the plaintiffs win, and then you got to treble those damages. So if they get the smallest amount they're asking for, $811 million, that would mean they would get $2.4 billion.
Okay, I do have one more. I watched a movie recently on Netflix. It was called The Burial with Jamie Foxx and Tommy Lee Jones. And it was based on a true story about an attorney that took this case that he normally wouldn't have taken. And it was basically this company trying to run a small mortuary company out of business. He wanted to buy it up so that he could add it to his big conglomerate of mortuary services, which basically dominated the United States. When it went to trial, the jury actually awarded more damages than they asked for. Could that happen here?
I mean, yeah, hypothetically, yeah, they could. They could say we found that the damages should be higher. But I guess I should note it depends on the judge's instructions. I don't know what the instructions are going to be. I don't know what the guidelines are going to be. The judge is going to give the jury. But in some states, in some cases, you're allowed to award higher damages than asked for if you thought it's called for. But a lot of that's going to be set by the guidelines that the judge sets for the jury. You know, what you can consider. So if the judge says you can only consider the damages laid out by the model, you know, I got to be careful what I speak to let people know. I'm not an attorney. I'm not an expert on federal antitrust law. So I'm not, I'm just a guy that follows this closely. So there could be, you would have to speak to someone that knows this specific type of suit and what's being asked to define what, if the jury could do that. But it's all, in other words, I don't know, I guess, is probably the quickest answer.
Okay. Well, that would be something that maybe we could refresh our listeners on with the next episode. Maybe we'll go back and we'll find that for everyone and find out if they can actually increase the damages as happened in that case that the burial was all about. I've been wondering that since I saw the movie, so I figured I would ask that when next we spoke, and here we are. So maybe we'll do a little research and find out if that can happen in this case. But for now, we are done for this episode. So, John, do you have anything you want to add to this, or anything you want to say?
No, I guess it's wait and see what happens.
Absolutely. So on that fine note, we're going to wrap up the show. Do me a favor, follow this guy on Twitter. He is at Hey Not the Face. His direct messages are open. So if you have questions, comments, suggestions for shows, please send him that message. He is also heynottheface@gmail.com if you prefer to send via email. You can do the same with me. I am crooklyn949@gmail.com, and my direct messages on Twitter are open. So if you have questions for John, if you have suggestions, anything like that, let us know. We both work for Bloody Elbow. You can always find John's fine work there. You can find all of John's interviews simply by going through his timeline, because he does retweet that stuff. He's pretty good about giving credit where it's due. So anyways, follow him, look through his timeline. You will get everything you need there. And do tune in the next time. Y'all know the drill, though. Until next time, please stay safe.
It's not in the face! Thank you.